Okay.
All right, got it. Cool. Well, yeah, thank you again for having us join you this evening. As Catherine and Rebecca mentioned, my name is Jeronimo Castañeda. I'm a senior project manager with Audubon, California on our working lands team. I am based out of Sacramento. I have worked with Audubon, for Audubon, about 4.5 years now. I grew up in the Bay Area. I went to school in Monterey and up in Arcata, Humboldt County, before I made my I settled down a little bit in Sacramento. I have a lot of background as a field biologist, where I was lead bander for a lot of different projects, mostly in California, but I did some work on the East Coast. And I'll pass it to Ian to let him introduce himself.
Hi, yeah, I'm Ian Souza Cole. I'm originally from Central Valley. I'm from Woodland. Yeah, I went to college at Oregon State University, got into birds up there, did a few years of doing technician jobs. A lot of it was here in the Valley, and that's where I first worked for Audubon, California, doing working lands stuff. So shorebird surveys and tricolored blackbird conservation work. And then I went to grad school out at University of Illinois. I got my master's, just wrapped that up, and now I'm back working for Audubon. So
Great. Yeah, we're excited to have Ian back working for Audubon. He brings a lot of expertise on some things that we'd like to explore and help grow our program. So he'll talk a little bit about some of that later. So today we're going to share a presentation on bird conservation on working lands. And specifically, we will talk about conservation ranching. I'll give a brief overview of kind of tricolored blackbirds in the Valley and the recent statewide survey. And then I'll pass it off to Ian to talk a little bit more about shorebirds and drought and some projects that we're working on in the Sacramento Valley. So Audubon Conservation Ranching. This is actually a program that I specifically don't work on. My colleagues Matt Alshouse and Pelayo Alvarez are leading that effort throughout the Valley, but it's an exciting program, and I thought it would be great just to share a little bit about it with you all. So the program really looks at ranching as a conservation strategy to benefit ecosystems kind of more broadly, but really focus on kind of sequestering carbon, increasing water filtration for groundwater recharge and that sort of thing. Obviously food, thinking about food and raising cattle, but then also fibers, and then also just providing open space, providing opportunity for folks to get outside sometimes, to go birding or see other wildlife, and just protecting that kind of vast openness across the landscape. And with ranching, unfortunately, there's few economic incentives for ranchers to be good stewards of their lands. You know, as agricultural practitioners, you know, the margins are often very thin, and so again, they don't have a whole lot of economic incentives or opportunity to necessarily go above and beyond and be excellent stewards of the lands that they graze their cattle. And to that point, ranchers tend to be land rich, but cash poor. And here in California, we see about 20,000 acres of rangelands and grasslands converted each year to urban development or some other type of industry. And so in this photo here, we kind of see that nexus and that encroachment. And in the middle of the frame, we see a house being built, kind of where it's likely that this grassland needs to extend down into. And as a result of that conversion and that habitat loss to grasslands, we've seen a significant decrease in grassland bird populations. And so here in this graphic, we see, overall decline in bird populations. And this particular study was one out of, I believe, the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and their decline of North American avifauna report. And again, as we see, grassland birds have shown the most drastic decline over the past several decades. And so thinking of ranching as a means to, or acknowledging that ranching can provide a lot of ecosystem benefits that I spoke to just a moment ago. We see this as an opportunity to use grazing and cattle to mimic the role of native grazers and rebuild soil, conserve water, and fuel plant growth. And so we're really trying to restore the functionality of these ecosystems to provide all of those services. And so through our Audubon Conservation Ranching Initiative, they are taking a market-based approach to help incentivize ranchers to become better stewards of their land and therefore benefit the ecosystem overall. And of course, as we are Audubon, we really want to focus on how this management and collaboration with ranchers will benefit birds. And so through a wide variety of implementing various habitat management practices for target species, we can then build up that system where these cows are grazing to benefit a wide variety of grassland and oak savanna species, many of which we see here in this graphic. And so that's kind of a big undertaking. It's like, how do we identify the best places and the most the places where we want to prioritize to get kind of the most bang for our buck? The team is pretty small. Like I mentioned, it's only Matt and Pelayo. And so since there's only two of them, they really have to take a strategic approach to put their resources. And so working with our GIS science team, they developed this landscape prioritization. And so what we're looking at here is the output from a model that incorporated a whole bunch of different variables from not only habitat conditions, identifying core areas for certain types of species or target birds, but it also looked at kind of where the markets would be for organic bird-friendly beef, as well as some other type of infrastructure like meat processing plants and that sort of thing. And so looking at all of that combined together, this model output this map here. And so we're seeing these bright green areas as high priority areas because maybe there's a processing plant that's pretty close. It also has high quality bird habitat nearby for target species. And also it may be near a market where there's a town or something like that where folks tend to be a little more into this kind of organic and free range, that sort of thing. And so using that model, the team set out a few years ago to start engaging with landowners and ranchers across the state. And to date, they have 16 fully certified operators across the state. And so in the map to the right here, we see the location of each one of those ranchers. And together, these ranches cover over 300,000 acres. And they're spread across 11 counties, and it's become so popular amongst the ranching community that we have about 17 more operations in line to become certified. And as we as this program continues to get built out, there are actually a lot of opportunities for chapter engagement. One of the things that Matt and Palaio are really working towards is trying to get to work with new partners, including chapters, to help out with some of the monitoring. So part of the deal for an operator to be enrolled is that they have to allow someone to come out and monitor the birds on the property, to do some soil sampling, and other vegetation surveys. And that's just part of keeping up on with the certification, as well as understanding kind of the long-term trends of potential benefits that we might see over time when a property gets enrolled into this program. Another way that chapters can engage in this is by just sharing the story. It's kind of a neat program that brings together agricultural practitioners, these ranchers, with conservationists, and together just showing that, you know, we can be good stewards of the land. We can still support ranchers and that ranching community, their livelihoods and that sort of thing, and together it can really benefit birds. And then lastly, of course, you know, it's a market-based approach to conservation. The incentive is for these landowners and ranch operators to kind of get you know, maybe a higher value for the cattle that they're grazing and they're raising. And so by going to local shops and stores where they sell Audubon friendly, Audubon certified meats, you know, by using our books, we can show to the market that, you know, this is value to us and we want to see more of it. And so the link here is a link to where to buy conservation ranching products across California and the country. And I really encourage you to reach out to Matt Alshouse and Palaio to learn more about ACR. I mean, this was definitely a quick high level overview of what they're working on. There's a whole lot of more science that goes into the prioritization and how they select these properties. They really invest a lot of time on developing habitat management plans and developing the metrics to really understand the benefits of this program to birds and the other ecosystem services that ranches can provide. So again, I encourage you to reach out to Matt Alshouse and Palaio, invite them to one of your upcoming meetings to give a more in-depth presentation to you all about their program, because it's really cool and there's a lot of interest from ranchers all over the state. Next, I would like to briefly give an update on tricolored blackbirds. So we just wrapped up the nesting season a few months ago, and so just kind of want to share with you all kind of what's up with the birds. And so really quick, as a reminder, tricolored blackbirds are nearly endemic to California. They're found mostly throughout the Central Valley, or at least the largest congregations of them are found throughout the Central Valley. But they do have smaller kind of populations or little groups, colonies spread out in coastal areas and as you move northeast as well. And in this picture, we see them, you know, flying this large flock, and that's what makes them kind of unique, because during the breeding season, they get together in these massive flocks to find a good site to nest. And because they nest in these dense colonies, that makes them particularly susceptible to any disturbances. And so here we see two pictures of nests that almost look like they're in identical substrate, but the one on the left is a nest found in a wetland, and the one on the right is a nest found in a dairy silage field. And so as I was just speaking to, one of the things that make this bird particularly special but also susceptible to disturbance, is the fact that as they colonize an area, they form these really dense groups of nests. And so if they're nesting in a silage field associated with dairies, and those dairy operators need to go in and harvest, that's a huge disturbance to the colony, and that leads to significant reproduction failure of tricolored blackbirds. And that has a really big detriment to the population. And so what we've been working on over the last 6 or so years is on this regional conservation partnership program, which is funded through the Natural Resource Conservation Service. And we're partnering not only with them, but also the dairy industry. We see Western United Dairies, the Farm Bureau, Dairy Cares, and together we formed this collaborative to protect silage colonies through working with dairies to delay harvest, through harvest management. We're exploring opportunities to develop long-term solutions and developing and implementing pilot projects to kind of see how we can improve habitat or ways to reduce this conflict between nesting colonies and birds and dairy farmers. And then, of course, continue to do outreach and education, not only to the dairy community, but to state and federal agencies and other land managers to increase awareness about this conflict and develop new partnerships to ensure that we can to think innovatively and develop other conservation strategies to protect this species. Some of which is thinking about land use change and how we can insert various management practices to restore habitat and enhance existing habitat. And this has been a really successful program and partnership. And over the span of the 6 years, we've been able to protect over 975,000 nesting birds. So that's adults. That's not necessarily the size of the population, but just when we think about from year to year, that we've been able to protect birds kind of cumulatively, we get this number. This has accounted for about 86 colonies that have been protected over those 6 years, and together collaboratively we've been able to enhance or restore over 130 acres of wetland habitat. And so what is, thinking of all of this effort that we put into it, kind of what does this mean for the population? And the one way that we get to this is through the statewide survey. And so before some folks jumped on, I was talking to Larry and he was telling me that he and a colleague participated in this survey effort. And so for background, the statewide survey is an effort that was coordinated by the Tricolored Blackbird Working Group. It was a means to get a kind of a relative estimation of the population. So the survey takes place over a 3-day period, and all these locations you see on this map, or as many as we could get to, were visited, plus additional sites where we thought that birds could be detected. And this is largely a voluntary effort, and so there's a lot of coordination that goes into this. These past years, it's been led by Bob Meese, who's been great at doing trainings and just getting folks excited about this. And so this project, this survey has been going on since the early 2000s, and so this is just a snapshot of the various years that the survey has taken place. Again, it's a triennial survey, so it only happens every 3 years, but it's really allowed us to get information on kind of the overall population trends and seeing how the population is responding to different climatic conditions as well as land use change across the state. So we see in 2000, only 206 sites were visited. And as we've gone through the years, we've gotten more and more sites that have been visited, which is really exciting. And so in 2017 was the last survey prior to this one this year. It was supposed to be held in 2020. However, because of the pandemic, that survey got delayed and pushed back. And so on to results. So here it's kind of, we're seeing a lot of information on this map. And so down on the x-axis, we see the year of the survey, 2008 to 2022. And then on the y-axis, we see the number of birds that were counted in that particular year. And so in 2008, during the statewide survey, surveyors counted about 395,000 individual birds. And we can see that the population in the statewide survey declined pretty drastically over that 6-year period to 2014. However, in 2014, the subsequent 2017 and 22 statewide surveys have seen an increase in population. And so, you know, for one, that's exciting. It's only a couple of data points, so we can't fully state that the population is rebounding, but it is, you know, moving in the right direction as far as we can see. I will note that that conservation partnership that I was talking about just a moment ago, this RCPP, it kicked off in 2015. And really, I mean, I guess kind of what I'm trying to get at here is that by bringing these partners together that have not historically collaborated and really focusing in on the issue and recognizing that, you know, together, the conservation community and the dairy community, they have this conflict, but working together, they're able to leverage the resources and protect a lot more birds. And so I think there were a lot of conservation efforts and other projects and whatnot going on throughout this whole time. But I think that partnership through the RCPP really kind of took tricolor blackbird conservation to the next level. And so from my perspective, I would like to say that because of that effort, we've started to see this trend of the population going up. And so kind of looking forward, you know, thinking about longer term tricolor blackbird conservation, we're going to just continue to promote multi-benefit land use to be beneficial not only to farmers, but also to birds, develop as many new partnerships as we can, not only with the dairy community, but also state and federal agencies and chapters and other conservation organizations. Continue to create new and enhance old habitat, in particular around crucial nesting areas like the southern San Joaquin Valley, and then of course protecting at-risk colonies. And then lastly, with the emergence of a lot of radio tracking technology and GPS and that sort of thing, we're really hoping to kind of lean into that technology and develop a project where we can tag some tricolor blackbirds in various colonies and see how they move around the landscape. And hopefully that'll help us to be better land managers and understand where they use the landscape and at what times of the year. And Ian will talk about a little bit of that technology in the next topic.
Great, thanks, Geronimo. Do you think it'd be easier if I just pulled up the PowerPoint, or should I just tell you next slide?
Yeah, go. You can pull it up. That's fine.
Okay. I know I gotta switch it, right?
What was that?
Are you guys seeing the presentation or the presenter view?
We're seeing the presentation.
Oh, okay, cool. All right, so yeah, I'm going to be talking about this drought impacts on migratory shorebirds project here in the Central Valley. And this is a project that has been conducted with the Migratory Bird Conservation Partnership. So that's includes us at Audubon, California, but also we have these critical partners who are also leading the project at Point Blue and the Nature Conservancy. And I also want to acknowledge the funders of the project. So it's primarily funded by CDFW as well as the Bechtel Foundation. And then we have these other partners who are helping with various other aspects of this pretty wide-ranging shorebird project. So as you know, the Central Valley here in California is a critical wintering ground, as well as migratory stopover site for thousands and thousands of shorebirds. Up to 500,000 shorebirds use the Central Valley in a given year during their life cycle. And while there are, there's these legacy wetlands, because the Sacramento Valley at one time was dominated by wetlands. Nowadays, there's only a few protected wetlands left. And what we have mostly is agriculture. A lot of it is rice agriculture. And so this habitat provides a nice stand-in for wetlands, at least during the winter, for these birds, because a lot of these fields end up getting flooded, either through incentive programs or because the land is being used for duck hunting. But whatever it may be, there's a lot of flooded habitat out on the landscape, and this really benefits shorebirds during the winter. But in drought years, that dynamic changes as there's less water on the landscape. So this chart shows the U.S. Drought Monitor for California over the last decade or so, showing periods of drought in the state. And so I'm sure you remember there was pretty severe drought between 2013 and 2017 that the state experienced. Then we got a few years off, but over the last couple of years, we've re-entered this status of pretty extreme drought across much of the state, including the Central Valley. And that has pretty extreme effects on the landscape and the habitat that is normally provided for these birds. So this chart on the left shows how much open water is on the landscape in typical years. And it's derived from remote sensing from satellites. And so you see in non-drought years is when we have the most water on the landscape, because there's more water available to wetland managers and farmers to put out on these fields. In drought years, there's a little bit less, but during these extreme drought years, like what we're going through right now in a lot of the state, there's much less water on the landscape for the birds. And how does this affect shorebird density? So during the last drought, 2011, 2016, the partnership conducts this Pacific Flyway Shorebird Survey that surveys for shorebirds at wildlife areas and in agricultural areas all through the Central Valley. And as you can see, during those really heavy years of drought, like 2013 and 2015, we had much lower shorebird densities observed in the valley. So we know that there's probably fewer birds on the landscape because there's less habitat available to them. And where they are, or where there is habitat, you end up getting a higher concentration of birds, but it's in much smaller fragments. And so what are the birds doing? Where do all the birds go during these drought years? It's likely that they're having to move around more. So they're moving between the small fragments that are left on the landscape, or they're moving over to the coast where habitat is a little bit more consistent regardless of the water year. But the more movement that these overwintering shorebirds are having to undertake might have some negative impacts on their fitness. And so that was a major impetus for this project to kind of understand how shorebirds react to drought with their movement, and then understand what the consequences of all that movement and drought condition is on their fitness. So what we want to learn with this project is so the direct impacts of drought on individuals. So, kind of their body condition and nutrition. And we can compare birds that are wintering in the Central Valley to birds wintering on the coast. That kind of gives us a contrast of the two different habitats, one more impacted by drought than the other. We also want to understand their movement patterns in California and outside the state, and see if there's any ways in which drought is impacting those movement patterns. And then we also want to know how important are these managed wetland refugia to these birds during drought years that provide a more consistent source of water year over year. So yeah, objective number one, we want to look at shorebird body condition and stress level. So we're doing some work on stress physiology and nutrition. Then objective two is to understand their movements. So to do this, we are utilizing the MODIS wildlife tracking system, which is this hemispheric and increasingly global system to track birds using these towers that you can see here on the right in the photo. Basically, it's some antennas attached to a receiver that is always scanning for tagged birds, so a radio telemetry tagged bird. And so these are the little tags that we use to put on the birds, this photo on the bottom. So we can put these on the shorebirds, and then using this system of receiver stations that are across California and across the West Coast, there's more and more being put out on the landscape every day. We can see where they go. So we can see where they go in California, if they go to the coast, and then also where they go during migration. So it's a pretty cool system that we're leveraging to study these species. And then finally, we want to know about those wetland refugia and how the shorebirds are utilizing them. So this is the map of the MODIS stations that were deployed on the landscape. So this was all done recently, like over the last year plus. All these stations were put on landscape by CDFW and by TNC. So you can see that we have pretty good coverage in the Sac Valley with all these red dots, red and green squares that represent MODIS stations. So between the Delta and Sacramento National Wildlife Refuge, we've got pretty good coverage. And then we also have some down at the San Joaquin. And then we also have these over in the Bay that will allow us to detect movements by the birds over into the onto the coastline or into the San Francisco Bay. And then, finally, the third objective is the relative importance of wetland complexes. So we're implementing a more frequent version of the Pacific Flyway Shorebird Survey. So we're just repeating those surveys at these wetland complexes on a very frequent basis during the migratory and wintering period to just see how the shorebirds are utilizing those wetland complexes. So the fieldwork involved is pretty cool, and we have one season under our belt. I say I haven't actually done it. I'm new here, so I started just last month, but our collaborators and Geronimo, they were out last year doing this work in the field. And so they have 1 year data and some preliminary results that we'll get to share that are pretty cool. So yeah, how we get the data is we have to capture some of these birds. So we use mist netting out in rice fields. You got to do it before it gets light out, because as soon as there's a little bit of light, the shorebirds see the nets and can easily avoid them. So yeah, shorebird capture best accomplished before dawn, and we mostly use mist nets, but we also attempted using leg snare mats. So those are basically just little loops under the water that their foot gets caught in, and we can catch them that way. But the primary method is mist netting. And then once we capture them, we take all the normal measurements that you do when you capture birds, and we band them, just kind of looking at their life history and general body size. And so in the first year, they were out 40 mornings during the winter at 3 different sites in the Sac Valley, and they managed to catch 93 shorebirds. So mostly Dunlin, a few long-billed dowitchers, and one least sandpiper. And so in order to answer that first objective about body condition, with these birds in the hand, we can assess their general condition in terms of how much fat and muscle is on the body. And so you do that by just blowing on the abdomen of the bird, and you can very clearly see how much fat is deposited there along kind of in the furricular hollow, which is right here on the chest, and then also on the lower abdomen and on the sides near the wing pits. So there's all this yellow fat that gets deposited there that you can clearly see through the skin. So we kind of have an index of how much fat is on the bird. And then we can also look at how much muscle they've packed on as well. And then we also collect a small bit of blood. So just a few drops of blood is all we need. And with that, we can do some physiological kind of in-depth stuff that I can't speak too much on, but one of the big things to look for is corticosterone. So that's I guess a hormone, or maybe it's not a hormone, but anyways, it's something that the body produces when they're under more stress. And so we can look at that with these birds, and we might expect during the drought years that the birds will be more stressed out and have higher corticosterone levels. And then we can also look at some other factors in the blood that will point to general fitness and nutritional and the nutrition that they've been taking in. So we got a lot of blood samples last year, and that's still in the process of being analyzed, but lots to look forward to there. And then we also tag these birds in order to track their movements. And so we put out some of those radio transmitters that you can see in the photos here on Dunlin and Dowitchers and one least sandpiper. And with 90% of those birds that we tagged, we detected movement. So that means that we detected the bird at least 2 different stations. So 2 of those different radio towers picked up the bird's signal, giving us a general idea of like the where they move to on the landscape. So what that looks like is here. So we tagged most of these birds up in the Sac Valley, and that's where most of the detections were. But clearly the birds are moving around those sites in the Sac Valley. But we also got some detections going south down towards the Grasslands ecological area near Merced. And then we also had a few that ended up over in the kind of in that Point Reyes area, and a few in the San Pablo Bay. So that's pretty awesome. And then looking farther afield, we also were able to track their migration, which is another cool thing we can do with the MODIS network, so we can see where they go to breed and where they use what stopover sites they use to get there. So we had a bunch of detections, mainly of Dunlin, up in Washington State and along the British Columbia coastline. And then we also detected a few getting up into Alaska, likely on their way to the Copper River Delta where they breed. So pretty awesome stuff. And hopefully this just continues to expand as we get more tags out there and as there's more towers on the landscape, because like I said, there's constantly more towers being put out there. I think the state of California has plans to put out 80 more in the coming year. So really will help to refine the how coarse the data is, and as we get more specific locations and have broader coverage across the entire flyway. And then finally, we're doing these shorebird counts. So we're doing the robust sampling design of the Pacific Flyway Shorebird Survey that's conducted all across the flyway. Observers enter the data online, and we get just counts of shorebirds at these wildlife areas. And we're doing this very frequently, so we have increased frequency during the migration period. So fall migration and spring migration, we're doing 2 per month. And then during the winter, we're just doing 1 per month. And this will give us kind of a baseline of how the abundance of shorebirds at these wildlife areas. And the wildlife areas in question are mostly state wildlife complexes. So Upper Butte Basin and Gray Lodge, up kind of closer to your neck of the woods, the Yola Wildlife Area, Grizzly Island Wildlife Area in the Yola Delta region, and then some down by the Grasslands ecological area. And then we also have these 2 TNC properties, Casumnes and Staten, where we're also doing the surveys. And And on that note, that kind of wraps up the topic of this study and the preliminary results. But I also wanted to put a note out there that we're looking for volunteers for this year's Pacific Flyway Shorebird Survey. So this is just one survey that needs to get conducted each year. We have about 50 routes. It gets run one time between November 15th and December 15th. So we're looking for volunteers that have, a little bit of experience with shorebirds and have some optics, and they can maybe run a route for us. So if you are interested, just send me an email and we might be able to coordinate something. So yeah, thank you. And I'll take any questions.
I've got can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a couple questions. Number one is like we were just at Gray Lodge last weekend, and the water levels are down quite a bit. So I'm wondering where the shorebirds go when the water is low. Do they bypass areas and look for where there's more water, or I mean they have to stop and feed, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I don't know the conditions at Gray Lodge right now. When we have a CDFW biologist runs that route for us, and they've been doing it for the last few weeks or last couple months. But yeah, I mean, the birds are going to look for whatever habitat is available. So there's probably other wildlife areas nearby. There's the federal complexes over to the west, and so maybe they're utilizing habitat that's already available there. More and more rice fields will start to get flooded up, during this month in preparation for the winter. So they'll start to have some habitat in that regard.
Right. Another question I have is, how long do those trackers last?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I know they're solar powered. So in all of the experience that I have tagging birds, I've always used battery powered tags, and so those have a limited term lifespan. So you're going to get 40 days out of this battery and it's going to die. But with these CTT solar tags, theoretically they will operate for a very long time, as long as they aren't getting covered up by feathers and they still get sunlight.
Right.
So the nice thing is you'll get some data on the migration and the return migration, and maybe the ensuing winter. As long as the tag doesn't fall off and it remains functional, you can get a lot of data.
Yeah, we just started northern saw-whet owl banding through Wintu Audubon here locally at Lassen Park. And I'm somewhat familiar with the nest captures, and looking at that image of those long nets over the shorebird habitat, seemed like they would get a lot of birds flying into those nets. They must have quite a large crew out there gathering them up.
Yeah. Geronimo has actually done it. I haven't yet. But yeah, as I understand it, it's initially hard because you kind of have one shot there at dawn. So you kind of have to be very thoughtful about where you put the nets. And then if the birds don't hit it during that period, then you're not going to have anything to do. But if they do hit it, then yeah, you might get a few dozen birds all at once. And so there will be a lot of work. So I think in general, we usually have a pretty big team of, 5, 6, 7 biologists out there ready to handle that load.
Right. And then I had a question for Geronimo about when you started the conservation ranching part of the program. You mentioned that they do the native grasses to mimic native species, which I assume are grazers like deer. And so, Geronimo, I'm wondering how they must move cattle a lot more often than if they want to mimic the grazing habitat of native species, right?
Yeah, absolutely. yeah, so Matt and Plio, they work really closely with each rancher and each operator. Because their operations, everyone's different. And then each parcel of land is different. And so just, they have to be on the ground, spending a lot of time kind of learning about that particular parcel and kind of the conditions there. And then they together with the rancher, they develop an appropriate habitat management plan that requires a lot more movement, like you said, of the cattle to mimic that kind of the native grazers like deer and elk and antelope and stuff like that. So yeah, a
And that's
lot more infrastructure also. So a lot more fencing and that sort of thing ends up going up. But yeah.
And that's working well, is it?
Yeah, I mean, as far as as I've been told from Matt and Plio, is that everyone's been pretty happy with kind of what's going on, and you know, they're seeing results of from you know, by doing that rotational grazing and paying a closer attention to how it's managed. They're increasing the amount of forage production, which, you know, definitely benefits the cows, but then also benefits the birds because it provides structure and opportunities for the birds to nest and forage themselves. So
Great.
yeah.
Does anybody else have any questions? If so, you can unmute yourself and ask.
This is Catherine. It seems like we should identify any participants in the ranching project in our area and maybe participate in encouraging purchasing. So I imagine we should contact Matthew to find out who up here is participating.
Yeah, he would be the best person to reach out to have that information.
Okay.
For sure. I do want to comment a little bit more on some of the drought stuff and the water situation. And so, you know, as Ian described, and you are all aware, you know, we've been in this extended drought over the last few years, and it's been a lot worse this time than it was in 2013 to 2017. And so that has created a lot of water cutbacks to the rice community, as well as to the refuges. And so just to kind of put it in context a little bit and understand the impact of those cuts, the amount of rice that was put into production this year is about half. And so and so that kind of trickles down onto how much rice is flooded over the winter to provide that habitat for overwintering shorebirds and waterfowl. And so in a typical winter, we're seeing about 300,000 acres of rice flooded to provide habitat. So this year we see half of that, so about 150,000 acres. So it sounds like a lot of acreages, but when, you know, you're thinking about the whole valley, Sacramento Valley, and the number of birds, it's not that much. And then as far as the refuges go, I mean, that impacts them as well. This year is the first year that they have received significantly less. I think they're looking at maybe like 18 to 30% of their typical allocation of water. And so again, I mean, that, like you said, Larry, you didn't see a lot of water on gray lug, and so that's kind of the result of those cutbacks. And that is one of the reasons. I mean, that is the reason that we're doing this drought study, is to understand what those cutbacks mean for birds, and hopefully it'll help us to inform management decisions. So looking at how birds move across the landscape, maybe we can target some of those incentive programs that Ian described about paying landowners to flood fields in certain areas that we are seeing birds, visit more often, that sort of thing.
Yeah,
Um,
that's got to have a huge impact on the waterfowl situation.
So,
Goodness.
Hi, this is Rebecca. I have a question. There's several conservation easement organizations or like that provide for ranchers or people in the area like Shasta Land Trust or the Rangeland Trust. And they actually, either give money or some monetary incentive or conservation easements. And you mentioned, Geronimo, that you guys just basically give the certification so they could sell their products as Audubon qualified. Do you find that a lot of these ranchers and people go more with the other kinds of organizations since they get more of a financial?
that's a good question, and I mean, short answer is I don't really know. But what I've heard is that by establishing this market-based approach where they can market at a higher price, that is more of a long-term benefit to them. Whereas a lot of, like, for example, if a rancher was to put their property into an easement, that's typically just a one-time payment where they get a lump sum upfront, and then that's it. Whereas again, this market-based approach, it's kind of forever as long as they are running their operation. I will also note that properties can be, they can have an easement, so they can work with both those land trusts and those organizations and Audubon. So they're able to kind of get as much as they can from the deal. Yeah, and and honestly, we encourage folks to work with as many different people as possible, because again, I mean, as I mentioned, the ranchers tend to be land rich, but kind of cash poor. And so, we're out here to try to help them. And so connecting them with other conservation groups that can provide direct financial payments for improving things on their property or just putting their land into easement. We're definitely very supportive of that. And we just offer an additional item that they can that can help them if they're interested.
Okay, yeah, we will probably put the link that you provided on the newsletter, the one where you can buy the products.
Cool. Yeah, and again, definitely reach out to Matt and Pelayo to learn more about the kind of the nitty-gritty of the program and get more details on like what they're doing with the ranchers and the operators and kind of where they hope the program to go.
Great, thank you.
Super. Great presentation. Are there any more questions for Ian or Geronimo?
Well, Geronimo and Ian makes me proud to send my dues contribution into Audubon. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. We love our chapter and our chapter members, and we recognize all the the love and passion that you put into the work yourselves, and so we're just appreciative that for everything you do also. And thanks again for having us join you this evening.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thanks,
Thank
Ian.
you.
So,